All right, good morning. So I'm going to break the first rule. You need to do this to ask questions, okay? Let this be interactive. We're not going to silence you when you do this, okay? What I was going to cover in the next 10 minutes or so is why open source. And it's not just networking. I mean, we are all networking geeks here, but there's a broader revolution happening in the industry. And I just want to show you in context of Linux Foundation, as we host these projects, what are the big things that are happening and how you can derive value from it, okay? I'm sure you know Linux Foundation, right? How many of you don't know it? I know nobody's going to raise it. It's the right way of asking the questions. But what you don't know is, and you may know it, but it might not be obvious, right? The mission is very simple. It's to create the greatest shared technology investment in the history, okay? So it's a shared technology investment by building communities, and it is across companies, developers, users, all of the above, okay? And what are we talking about here? We're talking about billions of dollars in shared R&D, right? We're talking about almost 900 plus members now. We're talking about projects that are, hugely impactful, events that happen, people get trained. So there's a whole revolution going on in the industry that's led by Linux Foundation. And if you look at some of the impacts, obviously everybody knows Linux, so that one's easy to understand. But almost all of high-performance computing market, almost all of the mobile devices, more than 50%, embedded systems, they're all open source based. They're all run by projects within the Linux Foundation. And including, if you look at the open source networking projects, which we're here, almost 70%, more than 70%, are hosted by Linux Foundation. So really, we're thrilled to have, ONF, Cord, ONOS, this is all part of the Linux Foundation family. And it's really exciting to sort of disrupt this industry that is ripe, okay? Now let's take one step broader, right? How does that happen? It's like contributors, it's the lines of code, it's the funding that has been raised, it's the valuation of the company, and it's the venture dollars that flow in. There's a lot of money to be made, okay? I think you have to step back and not look at the world the same way. Because incumbents will be challenged, right? And they will reshape to make money. It's not that this is a fight against the incumbents, right? It's a fight by the incumbents to change the way things are happening. And this is true for all open source projects, right? And so what I want to show you is, what's that cycle of open source development that everybody should be familiar with. And I want to start off by just saying there are millions of open source projects, okay? If you start attending, participating in every project's boot camp, you're done, right? I mean, you'll be fired from your company for sure, right? So, just Git and Apache and Eclipse and OpenStack. I mean, you can look at this list. There's millions of projects, okay? So which ones matter? That's the fundamental questions, right? And if you look at the value of the individual project on the y-axis and the number of open source projects, right? Really, we're looking at a very narrow subsection that matter. And the answer to this question is, it's the projects that have sustainable ecosystems. Not millions of lines of code and not disruptive technology and not, all those things are important, necessary, but, the most important thing is the ones that have sustainable ecosystems. And both words are important. Not just the ecosystem that comes together for 6 months and then dismantles, but it's sustainable, okay? And that's kind of the one on the very left, right, which is that's where we have to build the ecosystem as projects get launched. And depending on the phase of the project, we're there to foster that. okay? So how does this whole cycle work and how do we derive value from it is very nicely captured in this diagram, right? You know, and you can start from wherever, but let's say there are projects that get defined, right? Owners, core, you know, and we'll get to all the specific projects later on during the day. And there's a developer community that participates in the project. And then some shared technology or innovation gets created. From that, either end users or members or partners or the community, startups, incumbents, doesn't matter. They start putting them into products, right? Or making products out of them, or shaping the open source community to make it into products, which hit the market. Market leads to profits. The profits then are invested back in the community, whether it's through full-time engineers, whether it's through people participating in the community, through events, through whatever. There's many ways to which again leads to more projects, broader projects, interesting projects, and back in the game for a full loop and a full cycle. And these things, and think of it, all of you are part of a company. This is no different from a typical product management life cycle, right? A company goes through a product life cycle where you invest in the beginning, get the market up, invest for a market, and then reap the benefits, okay? So we are hoping and we are encouraging every one of you and everybody to participate in this cycle. But the most important thing is be aware where you and your company and your project is in this cycle. Because skills required at each stage is different. The market and the marketing required at each stage is different. The support and the testing and the infrastructure and the lab requirements are different, right? And from moving into these phases is definitely an art. And we've done it at Linux Foundation for a variety of projects. And we're very excited that networking is finally getting to a point where other open source verticals got to, right? This is the most exciting times that have happened. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a good idea. I didn't want to bore you to death on the details of each of these in terms of skill sets, but with this in mind, you can see the type of disruptions that we are going through at the Linux Foundation. Today is all about that lower right-hand corner, which is networking. But let's step back and look at the types of things that have happened, okay? On the left, it's really platforms and applications. This is, Linux, which is the most successful open source project in the history. There are projects like Let's Encrypt. Almost half the internet is being encrypted, right, and secured by these type of projects. The fastest growing right now is, blockchain, so Hyperledger, right? This is a way of, and by the way, for those of you who are not familiar with it, it brings, the financial systems together. There's a use case for IoT. There's a use case for carriers. There's a lot of interactions with that specific use case on blockchain. There's another one that is hugely popular, which is all around the cloud and containers. And then this is all about, the Kubernetes, for example. And again, cloud native apps, microservices, they intersect with networking big time, right? And again, the advantage of working with the Linux Foundation across these projects is as soon as there's an intersection of two major technology trends, we can figure out what the right solutions are. Like, for example, if cloud and networking intersect with CNIs, then we can get the CNIs figured out, right, on both sides and put the appropriate, and request the members to put the appropriate resources to move that forward. The other thing that is happening is all the automotive and automotive-grade Linux, right, is now coming into mainstream, right? I mean, the Lexuses that are going to come out this year are all going to be based on open source, right, in terms of the entertainment system and the dashboards and all that. So, and not just them, pretty much the majority car manufacturers are going to go down. There's projects on drone, et cetera. And then, of course, the most important, let's face it, networking, right? So we won't go into all of these. There is a session in the afternoon. I'll come back and walk you through some of the networking projects. But the point is, there is tremendous value here for open source beyond networking. And all of these projects, we learn from the ones that have gone before us, and we apply to the ones that are coming up, and in each of these phases. And every one of you, both individually and at a company level, derive value from it, okay? So with that, I'm going to pause for questions. I was told we can take some questions, yeah? Yeah? Okay. So yeah, raising hands is a good thing here. Let's see. Any general questions on, concerns, things that bother you, any disbelievers of open source? Those are the ones I really. Oh, you're a disbeliever. Oh, okay. 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 I can hear you.
Yeah. So one of the questions I see in all my meetings, whether it's with AT&T, Bell Canada, or the newer service providers that I look after, like Google and Facebook, is that they love open source. They love the fact that it is vendor agnostic and say they're not tied to any one solution. But then what they say is that, what if you guys move to the next coolest project and we are left hanging with whatever it is? So how can we help make sure that whatever open source project an operator is using, there is continued momentum and there is supportability, and we are looking out into the future, and not just that whichever is the most coolest open source project to work on, because it's very easy to not have responsibility, especially if it's in a open source forum.
No, that's an excellent question, right? What happens when you move from a typical coolness factor into a sort of a sustaining mode? And this is no different from a product as well. I think the answer to that is very simple. This is the beauty of the markets and the community, right? There is a place and value for the back end of a project lifecycle to someone. And I'm not specifying who, but in general, we've found that in some of these projects, which are not in the initial phases, but towards the what I call sustaining mode, there's value created by support. There's value created by fixing bugs that are custom to that a vendor or an enterprise can reap to support the carriers, okay? And so in general, there is always someone that likes that part of the curve. We all love to create things, and we are all in the early part, but don't underestimate the number of people who milk the value in the back end, especially because there's less competition there, higher premiums, they're kind of stuck, right? So, I'm just giving you the reasons why, but we have seen several of these projects that have been there for over 5 years now, that there's a whole community. It could be a different set of people, okay, supporting it. But to the carriers, you can probably rest assured because it's a 10, 15-year cycle, right? I still have my first code working. When I was in BNR, we wrote the code for call waiting. It's still working, okay? It's not ripping out. That's for sure. All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? It's bright light. Yeah.
Hi, Arpit. I'm Tom Unschutz from AT&T.
Oh, hey, Tom. Okay, I can. Yeah.
So my question is I imagine it must be one that most people have.
Yes.
And that is that selling the benefits of open source at sort of a working level is one maybe easier path to take. Selling the benefits of an open source strategy at the sort of corporate and executive level is another, and I think very important sort of thing that a company has to get over. How do we as a company build a corporate strategy around consuming and developing and participating in community-based projects? Have you got any insights on how to make that sort of jump within a company?
Yeah, so I think this is an excellent question because it's easy to convince engineers, right? GitHub is their resume. So, you can probably say, yeah, I contributed this, I wrote this algorithm, blah, blah, blah. That part is easy. The executive push, if you may, has been a challenge, okay? And I'll be the first one to admit, as we go through and talk to these projects, there are two types of companies that we work with. There's the believers, and then there is the non-believers. I mean, it's very simple. The believers are the ones who have a mission for, not just as Esteban said, right? It's not about, I'm going to get it for free. It's not that, right? The mission is really around, I'm going to use this building block to drive the community to help me to solve my problem. And in that way, I'm going to also support it and develop it further, right? So that's the crowdsourcing type mentality. So if the executives are convinced, then it's fairly easy, right? Because it's just a push down. One of the things we're trying to do with the Linux Foundation right now is to work out some collateral to help internal push, if you may, to the executives. Because the two questions I've heard is the CTO teams typically, or the R&D heads, they are convinced this is the way to go and they want to do this project, but what's the ROI? Right? What's the ROI for themselves? What's the ROI for the company? What's the ROI for the project, right? And most of them assume, oh, it's a reduction in cost. And that's not the only one, right? It's the cost, it's the agility, it's the efficiency, it's the opportunity to play with vendors. I give a simple example. You put in 5 engineers in an open source project, you have a community of 500 helping you build it. It's a no-brainer, right? Because now all of a sudden everybody is like working towards a common goal. I mean, the idea has to be good, obviously, right? But excellent question. I would be open to any other suggestions for people who have convinced senior management internally. I mean, when I was a vendor, it was easy for me. I mean, I believed in it. I was one of the first ones, and it was easy to make those calls. But you're right. Companies and member companies, I mean, I'm sure you guys are all here, so there's no debate here. But there are people outside this room who need to be convinced, right? And again, the reality is we are not at a point where we can go in and say, if you don't, you're going to be left behind. That's the reality, though, but we're not saying that yet. Okay. All right. One more? Yeah?
Hi, Arpit. I'm Chetan Jain from Ericsson.
Hi.
Hi. So my question is more towards machine learning. And what is your insight, like how far industry is in realizing the business value, or there can be real dollar from those efforts?
I'm not the expert. I will not answer questions that I cannot. I mean, I can speak for 5 minutes on machine learning, but I'm not the expert there. All I can say is there is tremendous insights from the network and data that has been harnessed at, whether it's at a port level or a link level or a config level or you name it, right? That data needs to be sort of used and applied, whether it's for learning, whether it's for policies, whether it's for configurations, whether it's for marketing, doesn't matter. There's a whole market that is being disrupted because of that. I don't know how it's going to span out, but it is an important area, right? And we are incubating a few of these. I mean, I've not put it here, but we are definitely incubating some of these machine learning projects at the Linux Foundation. But it's not like there's no clear like this is the direction market's heading. Okay. Okay. So I think that's it.